So we're going to look at a couple other commands that will enhance kind of the visual aspects and investigative aspects of what Mathematica will allow you to do, especially when dealing with infinity. So let's look at the command sum again, and here I'm going to sum 1 over square root of n. Notice the command for square root is sqrt, s is capitalized, n is in brackets. I'm going to ask it to add the first 5 terms, so n equals 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Shift enter, and it writes it out like that. It did combine n equals 1 and n equals 4 is actually going to be integers, and hopefully you can see why. So it did combine that, so instead of 5 terms, it only shows 4. Again, if you don't like that, you can use the command n, so it'll give you an integer value up to 5 decimal places, but that's not really what we're concerned with. But what we did in the last example was instead of going from 1 to a set number, we went from 1 to k. And if you remember, what we used was we did a discrete plot. And then what we allowed to happen is we let k go from 1 to, let's say, 20. Okay, and we can see what happens as k increases. It looks like the sum keeps increasing. So there might have been some confusion because of this k. So let me show you kind of a different command that hopefully will bring into mind what the k does. We're going to use the command manipulate. This is probably one of the most powerful tools in Mathematica because it allows you to see what's happening step by step. So if I hit manipulate the sum of 1 over square root of n, notice now it's going to just give me numbers, but it gives me this little slider which I can actually slide up and down. So what's happening? So when k equals 1, it's just adding one term. K equals 2, it's going to add the next term. 3 terms. Now notice on 4 terms, it's going to combine, because they were integers, 5 up to the 6th, up to the 7th, up to the 8th, so on and so forth. And you can go all the way up to 20. Okay? So manipulate, you can kind of see what's happening as you're adding more and more terms. And what discrete plot is doing is it's just saying it's just plotting these values as you choose higher and higher k's. Okay? So again, manipulate, good command to use. Okay. If you don't like the square roots, again, you can nest commands within commands within commands. Okay, so one of the places you can really use this idea of manipulate is, for example, let's say I want to plot sine of x. Okay, and I'm just going to let x go from pi, negative pi to pi. Okay, again, notice I'm trying to slip in a couple more advanced commands here. And you can see the graph of sine is not that amazing, but one of the things you investigate is what happens if you put a 2 in there? What happens to the period? And then I can say, well, what happens if I put a 3 in there? What happens to the period? But that's kind of tedious. You can actually see with manipulate, if instead of a number there, I put a times x. Again, when in doubt, I would put a multiplication sign. And now I can use manipulate. And what I'm going to ask it to manipulate is I'm going to ask it to manipulate that variable a. So let's say I want a to go from 1 to, I don't know, 6. Okay? Shift enter. And now what you're going to get is you're going to get a control where if I change the value of a, and you can actually see the values, notice the graph will actually act accordingly. So you get a much more visual idea of what's happening as you're changing different variables.